Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the hosts of Circle Forum, and I'm joined by my co hosts, Shelley Steele and Steve Young. In this episode, we delve into the mysterious world of student attendance and the challenges that educators and families are grappling with. I am sure you'll be as captivated as I was by the stories and the insights shared. Understanding the complexities of attendance is crucial because it can help us create safer, more supportive learning environments and bridge that gap between home and school. If you're currently facing the challenge of declining attendance or simply interested in the changing landscape of education, then this episode is for you. Throughout our discussion, we'll explore the safety concerns leading to absenteeism, the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on education, and the significance of rebuilding social connections in schools. Remember to visit our website at www.restorative.ca for valuable restorative resources that are free. And if you find this episode enlightening, be sure to subscribe to Circle Forum on YouTube. Now, let's dive into this thought provoking conversation with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. An article recently from the United States talks about how millions of students are missing school as attendance tanks across the US. And I think the fact that it's happening in the States, it's also happening in Canada. And there's some interesting stories of families who've really been struggling. One story to start off with was an 11-year-old boy who didn't feel safe at school. And so he stopped coming, and there was nothing that his mom could do to really get him to go to school. And so addressing something like safety at school can be a way of helping this particular student get back to school. There were other things in this article.
What stood out for me, there's a couple of parts where it talks about the lingering effects from, of COVID and how we taught kids through those 2 years of COVID. If they were at home and we taught in different ways, we developed a new way of learning, teaching and learning that basically said you can be just as successful in school if you sit at home and go on your computer and the teacher can teach that way. And so now all of a sudden we're saying, now come back to school. We want you to come back to school. It's the better way. But you've told us for 2 years that this was a better way. And so for some kids, they actually did find that they could excel better by sitting in front of a computer for even a few hours a day rather than being in school. And if you take some of those kids who are maybe having problems at school, whether it's bullying or relationship problems, now they've got a way out. I can sit at home, look at my computer, and I don't have to face all those issues that I had to face at school all the time. And so why would I go back to school? And their parents are agreeing with them. So I find it interesting. The second part in the article, it relates to the ongoing effects of the pandemic is we also told kids for 2 years, the slightest sign of any sickness and you stay home. If you've got even the sniffles, stay home, keep everybody else at school safe by you staying home. Now, yeah, but if you got the sniffles, you can come to school now. Well, how come I couldn't before, but I can now? So they've got these mixed messages that we're trying to send out. For some kids, they're still believing the old messages. You know what? I'll stay home if I feel a little bit sick. And so that's going to boost your attendance.
Well, and all of that has impacted the relationships, not only at school, but between schools and families, between schools and parents. So those relationships are frayed. Should I stay or should I go? Kind of a thing, right? So that's the context of fractured and frayed relationships that's making it tougher to even have these conversations about why you should be at school or not.
And I think that's a really important point, Stan, that it really, all the things that Steve said that we're seeing as impacting the students, it's the parents, of course, that are going to support or drive or keep students home based on the sniffles and the mixed information they get. Or I see my kid emotionally better, not coming home distraught each day. All those reasons, it's really the parents that are making those decisions for their students. So although we're focusing and saying this is a better way for your student, for your child, I don't know that parents are getting that message. And maybe they're seeing that it isn't the better way for their child because they do know there are alternatives that there weren't before.
The part of the article that really struck me was the study from Alaska, where the native students or indigenous students, their attendance rate or their rate of absenteeism was 56%. And these students are facing poverty, lack of mental health services, and they're facing a history of the government, certainly in Alaska and all across the states, forcing Native students into boarding schools. In Canada, we would refer to them as the residential school. And the quote that just I keep coming back to is one of the Native parents talking about and saying, "Our families aren't valuing education because it isn't something that ever valued us." Wow.
So
What
there's
do
your
we have?
disconnect, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Any of the BIPOC can say, what schools never reflected our culture. For a lot of the immigrants coming to North America, Canada, and the US, how are we reflecting their cultural background and their what they believe and what they think is important in our curriculum? And we're not. And now we're making efforts. Maybe we're making efforts, but is it good enough right now? One of the schools I was at, almost 35% of the students were from Sri Lanka. I don't think that anything much reflected their cultural background in what we were teaching them on a day-to-day basis. Over time, that stuff may change if people are open to making those changes. And if we're not open to making the changes, it's going to be long before those parents say, you know what, the schools aren't reflecting who we are. Why would I send my kids there?
Those groups that you reference are actually overrepresented in all kinds of negative statistics in school. They're overrepresented in terms of absenteeism. They're overrepresented in terms of suspensions. They're overrepresented in terms of expulsions. And so, if you have a large community in your school, whether that's Sri Lankans, whether that's Black, whether that's Indigenous, take some time to first of all, identify that that is a large group in your school and then build some intentional connections with those communities to find out, so what is it
Mhm.
that your native community, your indigenous community needs? What is it that we're missing out on? And these are not easy conversations to have, but unless you ask, you'll keep doing the same thing over and over again, and those communities will continue to feel undervalued. One thing about having your students back in school versus the online learning that I think we haven't really explored a lot, certainly in education, is the social connections that need to be redeveloped for the kids and how important that is. We've seen that in the pandemic when kids felt isolated and lonely, and anxiety, depression rates were much higher. One of the things, not the only thing, but one of the things that can certainly help is building those social connections. And that happens best at school and being intentional about that. I would say that building those kinds of connections through circles and classrooms can really start to help build, hey, there's a commonality. We both have the same type of dog, or we both really like um, medieval sports, or we're both into Dungeons and Dragons, whatever, those kinds of things, to build those sorts of connections by getting to know kids in your class. You can do that best face to face.
Yeah, you're right, Stan. And we've always espoused that when we started practice about building a classroom climate. And every teacher in the school did that, the school would be a much better place. But there's teachers are still struggling with that, but the kids have lost so much curriculum. I got to get caught up in the curriculum. Where am I going to find time to do a circle every day? We've heard that as long as we've been talking about this sort of practice. Even more so now, they need to be given permission from principals, from superintendents, from directors that it's okay to take time off to rebuild those connections and think about how kids are feeling in schools, and take some time out of your 300 minutes of the day or 40-minute period or 75-minute period to do that relationship building is so key, because if you just plow back into the curriculum and forget about that, the kids are going to start falling by the wayside again.
Yeah, the students that are able to hop back in and easily make social connections are not going to be the kids that struggle with attendance the same way, or for very different reasons. It'll be the ones that have that difficulty transitioning back in for many different reasons and making connections with other students that are going to start to drift away from us again. And it'll be the same kids popping up year after year that they all come back all shiny, bright, and new and ready for school. And it's the same kids that drift off each year. And we just say, that's what they do, as opposed to looking at what we can do differently.
And I think just being intentional about giving people, like, I loved how you said it, Steve, give teachers the permission to
Mhm.
take the time to build those connections. It's really important. And it's not things back to normal the way they were pre pandemic, because things are not the same as they were before the pandemic. So that intentional permission to take the time to build those connections, I think, is really going to be important. Just numeracy and literacy and all of the subjects that we teach, this needs to move up on the priority scale so that those relationships can be built.
It is the relationships that get us through life. It is our connections, and we have you have to teach sometimes those how to do that as well. How do I enter a group? How do I find something in common with somebody else? Because it is those skills that move people along in careers, in life, and particularly when things are tough.
Yeah. And with September coming up, it's like spring only in the education world. That's the time for regrowth and renewal. And I've always said, that you sow the seeds in September and you reap the rewards in June. And if you can take a ton of time in September to build those relationships and build your classroom climate, you'll reap those rewards when it gets tough. When the tough times come, which is May and June, you really got to work hard in September.
It's clear that student attendance is more than just numbers on a roll call. It's about safety. It's about understanding the impact of mixed messages, and it's about rebuilding connections in the classroom. We hope you've gained some valuable insights into this complex issue, but hey, the conversation doesn't end here. Continue the dialogue in your own communities, schools, and homes, and remember, education is not just about what's taught in textbooks. It's also about the relationships we build along the way. Check out our free educational resources at www.restorative.ca. And thanks for tuning in to Circle Forum. Don't forget to subscribe. And until next time, keep learning, keep connecting, and keep making a difference.